Yo, I'm Bob. Into Marvel. Happen to be totally blind since birth. Talking about Spider-Man the Animated Series, Season 2, Episode 6, Neogenic Nightmare, Chapter 6. This one's called Morbius. This one premiered on October 28th in 1995. It's episode 19 of the series overall. Spoilers ahead. If you haven't watched the episode, I'd advise you to do that, or you're going to get spoiled. That being said, jumping right in, and you were warned.
Pause video space. Resume.
So when the episode began, I had no idea what the title was. I didn't have anybody there narrating the title for me, so I wasn't sure what we were in for. I knew Spider-Man had his hopes up. He decided to, quote-unquote, turn to his friends at the end of the Spider-Man X-Men crossover, so he is a lot more hopeful as the episode begins. He reveals to the audience that Mariah Crawford believes she's found a cure to his mutation. So I think while he's getting his hopes up about that, he's doing some friendly neighborhood Spider-Man shtick. It seems to be after hours because he jokingly calls the folks he's going after a midnight ski team or something like that. I've seen this episode like maybe 21, 22 times over the years. That's how many times I've watched this freaking show because I like it so much. So I don't know if they're robbing cars. I don't know if they're making off with money from a bank. I always thought they were making off with some cars, but I never have been able to get that confirmed because no audio description in these older shows, of course. And I like how, as he's trying to stop them from hightailing it, his sides start hurting. And one of the things I like about the show, I think I've mentioned this before in one or two videos, but Spider-Man is very verbal when it comes to what's going on with him. So when he started talking about pain in his sides, I was like, oh geez, this is going to be one of those races against time, isn't it? She better figure out a cure really fast because it sounds like something's about to come through his sides. I think I'd already seen Alien by this point. So, I mean, I wasn't sure what we were in for, but yeah, when he started crying out, and when this pain hindered him in combat for the first time, right at the beginning of the episode, I was like, yeah, this guy doesn't have very, very long at all. So I remember feeling a bit tense when the episode started. And I remember taping this and going to commercial. You had the hoods about ready to, as he says, ventilate him. He feels like he's going to be, as he says, ventilated by a bunch of street hoods. No, not taken out by a very powerful villain. Not going out in a blaze of glory, but a couple of guys with guns are going to do him in because he is in too much pain to fight. I wonder how that feels. I've never had appendicitis, so I don't know. Maybe it's like that, but going all up and down your sides, it's got to be bad enough to where, I mean, it's tough for him to even fire webs. I mean, it's got to be excruciating pain. Well, he says it's excruciating over the period of 22 minutes. So he manages to get out of there. I like how he uses the cops to his advantage, but the cops are thinking that he's with the crooks. They want to stop him for questioning here. But he manages to get back to Mariah's lab, and she notices how much in pain that he actually is when he gets back there. And this is one of those moments in the series that you really get to see how terrified he is. She's talking about how, yeah, she's finished the serum, but she doesn't want him to take it because for all she knows, it could destroy him. You can't use the K word in the 90s because of those crazy censors. We'll be talking about the censors a bit more later on with this particular episode. Yeah, so she says, this could destroy you. It could remove your spider powers permanently. We don't know. I'm going to need to run some more tests. Then he starts demanding that she give him the serum because he feels like he could mutate at any moment. So his fear leads to anger, as a certain Jedi Master once said, and he just starts pillaging through her lab, he starts begging her to give him the serum, and then he's like, well, just give me what I need. If you don't give me the serum, I'll have to find it myself. And but she calls him out on it. I like how she tells him, hey, you need to stop what you're doing right now and look at what you're doing. You're becoming the monster you don't want to be. And he realizes that, yeah, he is scared, he is desperate, but he's not acting right. And I mean, I get why he's doing what he's doing. There's no telling what scenarios he's running through his mind and what he has been torturing himself with for quite some time. And, he's got the serum right there, and he's being told that he needs to wait. So he does apologize to her. And I like how she's able to empathize with what he's going through. Because, of course, she's been there with her boyfriend Sergei back in season 1. She knows what kind of situation this is. She's seen it before. And she's like, you don't need to apologize. Not after all you did for me and my boyfriend. So he takes the serum, and he does tell her, hey, I'm going to be careful, and I'm gonna run my test with it. So when we see Morbius show up, I'd forgotten all about him. I mean, I didn't even know the episode was called Morbius because I didn't have anyone narrating the title. So when he pops up, doing what he's doing, I was like, oh yeah, this guy. I wonder what he's up to. And we see that Morbius is working after hours. He tells Deborah that he wants to stay and work on his Neogenics project. And he's kind of deriding her for heading home and going to sleep. He's apparently been up for 24 hours as he's still working on that project of his. And Felicia shows up. I like how they're having this little after hours rendezvous. Apparently he has let her know where he is because that's where he's doing his work. And she notices the vampire bats and gets a bit squeamish of them. And she's wanting to know why he is being so secretive about his project. And I like how he tells her, well, if you're trying to compete in America, you have to have an edge. You can't show any weakness. But as he's explaining to her, why he's doing what he's doing, she starts to realize, hey, I didn't know this project meant so much to you. And he looks at her and he says, well, that's because you're wealthy. You don't know what I'm going through back home in my own country. You don't know what poverty is like. I have to do this. I've got to work on my project because I made my countrymen a promise. And then he goes into how his village, probably more than one village in his country, is being ravaged by a plague. And he believes it's been started by vampire bats. So, he's there in America to try and get that job as Connor's research assistant because he wants to find a cure for the people closest to him. We don't know if he's lost family members in this incarnation or not. I like to think he might have, or he is having to. He's also having to race against time to find a cure, which explains why he's working so hard. But I like how Michael is letting Felicia see a side of him nobody else is able to see. I mean, he wants to come off, to Parker, for instance, as very arrogant, very intimidating, very brash. But Morbius is a very desperate man trying to do his best to get that job as Connor's assistant so he can find a cure because he's made a promise to his countrymen that he's going to come back with one. And I got to liking this guy when hearing about what he's going through. It's really great that they added this layer to the character because it really threw me for a loop. I was like, okay, this guy doesn't seem half bad now. I wish him all the best. And, then, of course, we have Peter showing up. And he's trying to run some tests on his DNA with the serum. his blood rather, his actual spider blood, his radioactive spider blood, if you want to call it that. And he can't because he's going through more horrendous pain. I think he even says it's worse than before, so he's just got to go home. I don't know if he locks it up somewhere. If he does, Morbius is able to pick that lock and find his project. He thinks it's a project that Peter has engineered. He feels like Peter's engineered this DNA, and he wants to know how he created it because he feels like, well, of course, this could cure the people in his village. And of course, in the meantime, you have this bat jumping into, I think it's the Neogenic Recombinator, and Morbius realizes what's going on. He tries to get the bat out of there, bites his hand, and he becomes Batman. Well, no, he becomes a vampiric character. And I remember watching this for the first time and thinking, oh wow, we're probably going to get to see him biting people. This is going to be cool. But no, the censors would not allow Morbius to actually batten on anybody because, you know, once he's bitten by the bat, he's able to fly. But his face also changes. I do believe he has fangs. I had the Morbius action figure. I had two from the Spider-Man Toy Biz line back in the day. Both Morbius with face-changing action. You squeezed his legs together, and his face would rotate around to reveal his vampiric face, and then you could kind of reverse it, go back and forth, as he does here in this episode. I mean, his face gets all vampiric. The chin looks a bit sharper when his face changes. Of course, I do believe he has fangs. He says his nasal structure is distorted, so that's not good there. He wants to know how to reverse the process. And as he's learning about his powers, his ability to defy gravity, now I'm thinking of Wicked. It's a great musical. He realizes that he feels, how does he put it? A hunger! So now he's hangry, and he feeds on someone at the university. And instead of biting them, he has to, how did my brother describe it? I think he puts his hands around their arms, maybe their sides, maybe their shoulders, and he's able to drain their quote-unquote plasma, because you couldn't say blood in this context in the 90s TV show. So that's how Morbius does his vampire thingy do. He just drains their plasma through his hands, and you know, that's how he feeds. I didn't really think anything about it. I was like, yeah, you know, you're gonna have angry parents writing Fox angry letters, and I'd already had to listen to a lot of school teachers talk about how bad and awfully violent Power Rangers were, how they were a bad influence on everybody. Never mind the fact that they're straight A students who do a lot of charity work after school. That's a video for another day. But yeah, they had to kind of work around Morbius being a vampire. And I mean, it's all right. I still give this one a 10 out of 10 because they don't shy away from the fact that he is a vampire. We meet more vampires as the show progresses. But in the meantime, yeah, he's feeding on people from the university, draining their plasma with his hands. I remember when he did it for the first time, I thought he was actually biting somebody. And then he describes how he drained it through his hands. I was like, oh, okay, so that's how they worked around it. I thought that was pretty cool when watching it for the first time.
Stop. Pause. Space. Resume.
So you've got Peter walking home, and he ignores Mary Jane and Liz. And I get why he's doing it. He feels awful for having to do this, but he does not want to put MJ in danger. So he's like, well, what am I supposed to do? Tell her, hey, yeah, we can have a relationship, but by the way, I'm turning into a mutant. So he's like, he says he feels like a heel. I think he's talking to his gargoyle buddy. At least I think Bruce is a gargoyle, either that or some other statue. I like how he has to confide in an inanimate object because, I mean, he just doesn't really have anybody to talk to about what he's going through. You know, he can't really go into detail with Mariah Crawford or Connors about what he's going through. And then he hears what's going on campus. He just so happens to be there for Morbius, you know, and feeding time.
Stop. Pause. Space. Resume.
So we don't really get much of a fight scene between Spider-Man and Morbius. I mean, we do get a little bit of one, but I like how this episode is kind of dealing with their internal struggles. I mean, we don't really get a lot of action here, but we do get a big chunk of Morbius backstory. So Spider-Man is able to decipher who Mr. Creepo was because Morbius left his, I guess it's a mini quarter. I would imagine it's a mini quarter. My mom used to use those for her transcription stuff. She had to do a lot of cardiology transcription, so I always imagined something like that that Morbius might have been using to record his little science logs. I don't know, but yeah, Spider-Man is able to listen to a bit of that, put two and two together, and figure out that Mr. Feeding Time is actually Morbius. And of course, he feels awful. He's beating himself up right and left because he left the blood at ESU. And he feels like, of course, he's got to do his best to save Morbius. If he can't save himself, he's got to save Morbius. And one of the quotes, I don't know why it stuck with me all these years. What is it? It's like, why is it everyone I touch, everything I touch, everything and everyone that touches me, it's poisoned. And he's just in a really, really bad place right now. They both are. But I like how Spider-Man is still able to feel sympathy for Morbius. And he feels like he has got to do everything he can to save this guy. Even though Spider-Man is going through one of the most horrible situations he's ever been in, he's scared to death. He could be mutating at any moment. He still drops that. And he goes after Morbius because that's just who he is.
Stop, take, pause.
But I also like that we got to see how scared and how desperate he was earlier in the episode. I mean, desperate and scared enough to scare one of his buddies. And I like that it's in there because he's not Mr. Perfect superhero guy, you know? He is going through something that has him scared to the point where he's willing to wreck a lab in order to get what he feels like is going to cure him. But then he does come to his senses. He does realize that what he's doing isn't the best thing. And he does come to his senses.
Pause video, space.
I like how Spider-Man manages to figure out what Morbius wants, where he would probably go in order to talk to somebody about what he's going through. Because he says, what would I do if I was in his situation? Well, in a way, I am him. And he realizes that he would want someone to confide in. He would want someone to help him through it, just someone to talk to. And he realizes that, yeah, he's kind of sweet on Felicia. So he tries to tell her, hey, Morbius is going through something right now. You need to be very careful. He's dangerous. But Felicia, being Felicia, feels like they're fighting over her. And she's still miffed with him because she thinks he's blown Felicia off for one too many times. So she accuses Spider-Man of being jealous, and I love how he's like, what? He's been so serious throughout the episode, but she's managed to flabbergast him to the point where I just love how he manages to deliver that line. Christopher Barnes got a really big chuckle out of me when I saw it for the first time. Maybe it was a belly laugh, but I was like, wow. So in the midst of all this, he has to deal with trying to convince Felicia that, no, I'm not jealous. This guy is hurting and he's not necessarily himself. So you got to be careful, but she's not listening to him. So he just kind of gets kicked out, and then he shows up, and well, things aren't good when he shows up.
Stop. Pause space.
So about Morbius, he resisted feeding on Spider-Man earlier in the episode. He knows what he needs is going to hurt people. And I like how he is doing his best to stave off the hunger. And here again, when he's showing up, when Morbius is showing up to Felicia's place, he manages to stave it off again. And then you have Spider-Man showing up to help him, but he manages to ward him off because the sun comes up, and him being a vampire, he is weakened by sunlight. I think they go into a bit of the science of it in the Blade two-parter that we'll be getting into in a few episodes. One of my favorites. I have a lot of favorites from this show. He is able to get Morbius to the hospital. Morbius does not stay in the hospital. He does manage to escape. Felicia she's highly upset with Spider-Man. She blames him for Morbius being kidnapped. That's what she thinks has happened. She believes Spider-Man has kidnapped Morbius. And now the cops are after Spider-Man. And this just leads to a whole mess of problems in the next episode. We have someone showing up really wanting to punish Spider-Man. In the meantime, you have Spider-Man wanting to take the serum. He feels like if it does cause him to lose his powers, that's fine because he's tired of hurting people. He feels like no matter what happens, he needs to take the serum. But of course, Mariah's doing some research, and she realizes that the cells were fine, but all of a sudden they started mutating like crazy, and she calls Craven to tell him, hey, you got to get down here, because if Spider-Man takes this, it could change him almost instantly. And I'm like, oh, well, this is not going to be good. And then he does take it, and then you do hear him screaming in pain. You do hear bones cracking. It was one of the, I don't want to call it terrifying, but it was something that I was not used to in 90s kid shows, but I loved it. I'd already seen, I think, 1 or 2 werewolf movies, so I was like, oh man, what are they going to do to this guy? And, you hear clothes ripping. Now, when I watched this for the first time, I didn't know he grew 4 extra arms. I had to wait until, spoilers ahead, unless you have watched the next episode, I'd advise you to pause it. You've probably already seen the whole friggin' thing. Anyway, Punisher says in the next episode when he sees Spider-Man, he's like, 6 arms? So that's when I found out what exactly happened because, well, as I said, no audio description. I wasn't sure how he mutated, but I was like, oh, well, at least he's still able to scream no before we went to that cliffhanger. I was like, he still has his mind? That's cool. I mean, it can't be that bad. Little did I know, this was only the first stage of his mutation. And we ended on another cliffhanger, and we had to wait a week to figure out just what in the heck was going to happen next. But I don't think I called my brother that particular weekend. I was like, I wonder what mutated, because he sounds okay. He probably doesn't. I didn't realize he didn't look okay. I figured he didn't, but I was like, I wonder what's going on. I should have my mom or my stepdad come in there and be like, what the heck happened to this guy at the end of this episode here? But I was just too bent on rewatching it. I actually like that I left it to my own imagination. I can't remember what I imagined, actually, because it's been so long since I watched it for the first time. I don't think I imagined extra arms, though. I don't remember. It has been so long since I watched it for the first time. But like I said, I love the horror vibes to this episode. And Fox deciding to air the episode, the weekend before Halloween, I think it was a stroke of genius. I loved that. That's where the episode fell in 1995. It was perfect for October 28th. And, man, I really liked the episode. In spite of the fact that Morbius drains blood through his hands. I mean, it's okay. The action figure, I don't know if I mentioned it in this video or the last one. I might have already mentioned it. But one of the palms on his hands, one of the hands on face-changing Morbius, they were splayed, I guess, so you could maybe have him touch another action figure and kind of drain some quote-unquote plasma like that. But loved the episode. I liked how both Peter and Michael were going through their own struggles, but you have Spider-Man willing to do his best to put his struggle aside in order to help somebody else, because that's who he is. In spite of him getting afraid and angry, he still manages to put that aside and worry about somebody else, because that's just how he was raised. I think that's how his aunt and uncle raised him. And yeah, pretty fun episode. Next time, we're going to be talking about the Punisher. Yeah, he shows up in Spider-Man. That's the first time I actually came across his character. I actually came across the action figure before, but we'll talk about that in the next video. So yeah, be here next time as we are introduced to Frank Castle himself. Until then, I'll hear you later.
Stop taking video.